So the Epstein scandal is suddenly back in the news in a major way on account of the fact that we now have access to yet more email conversations, email messages that seem to pretty clearly implicate Epstein himself and what he was doing with our disgraceful president. And we knew this, but let's face it, even though it was in the background and we thought it might resurface at some point, it has now all of a sudden burst forth in a somewhat unexpected and shocking way. And this is something you can see in the astrology really clearly by looking at the chart of the president, as well as the chart for Epstein, and most especially in that case, the composite chart between Trump's chart and Epstein's chart. So something like this happens, you look at where the planets are, and in particular, planetary stations are very important, very descriptive. And there you see that we're pretty much in the heart of the Jupiter station at the moment. And here's where you see this pattern that shows up in astrology so frequently, which is planets do double duty, triple duty. They're doing multiple things at once. And indeed, they can be positive and negative. They're not always positive. So if you see Jupiter next to his Venus in his 12th house, you can see there have been positive effects, including the fact that he was getting all kinds of compliments when he was traveling in South Korea, or the fact that, for example, he's very keen on building this ballroom, although you see negative effects from that as well. Really, any sense that he's getting some protection or he's succeeding in some way, you can always attribute to Jupiter. But that house is very complicated. It's the 12th house, and when you see Jupiter conjunct Venus, this is exactly the kind of thing that can bubble up and become a huge problem concurrent with the time period we're in now. Jupiter is stationary right on that Venus. But then you add to that the fact that Mercury has just gone retrograde, which has a suggestion of this going back to something that originated in the summer, when in fact a lot of that news back then was in the midst of a retrograde cycle. Back then it was Leo, now it's Sagittarius. But even more incredibly interesting is that the degrees of Mercury now, as this surfaces, are conjunct Trump's black moon. Black moon and the idea of dirty deeds, the shameful things, the dark things that one would prefer would never come to light, surface. To which you add that, coincidentally, as always happens with astrology, which is the notion that the synchronicities are what astrology is all about, the meaningful coincidence. Mars happens to be at those exact same degrees in the 5-6 degree range of Sagittarius, whereas black moon is being triggered by the Mercury and the Mars. Mercury, of course, is very directly linked to messages and messaging and the theme in that sense. And amazingly, if you look at the composite chart made by Trump's planets and Epstein's planets, the composite Mars happens to be in these very same degrees in Gemini, which means that the transiting Mars is opposing it, thereby, again, triggering the topic. Now you have to remember that if this is bad, really it can only get worse. And the reason is that as we go toward January, we're going to have an Eris station, and you remember that the theme, the topic, really blew up into public consciousness in July. In part, you could blame the Saturn-Neptune stations that were happening then. Of course, they were involved. But more to the point, the Eris station. The reason is that, as you've heard me say ad nauseum, that Eris in transit is parked in his ninth house, which is, again, with astrology and the multiple meanings. That house is the legal house, house of law, house of often of lawsuits, although that involves the seventh somewhat, but the ninth is the pure house of law. But it's also where things are published, literally, ninth house, the natural place of Sagittarius, which in his case is occupied by Eris. And so the idea of something becoming public is linked to this. And then you get into the theme of what Eris is. Eris is the angry warrioress. Eris, hitting his Venus in a square for years, it's not going to let up, is doing this. It's brought the Epstein matter into public consciousness. It's not going away, and you can expect that whenever it stations at those same degrees, it's going to amp it up. And this is the result of not a witch hunt, like I'm sure he's going to start saying soon that the whole thing is a witch hunt. It's not. It's karmic retribution. You do things, they come back to haunt you. And the symbolism could not be more clear, because this is exactly what Eris does. It's almost a form of revenge from women, but I think, very deservedly so. And if you say, well, okay, but what about the fact that this feels like a shocking, sudden thing? Well, there you look to the other planet that is very active right now by way of a change in very recent days. Uranus just came out of its Gemini period in the late summer and into early fall. It was in Gemini. Now it's back in Taurus, where it'll be until next year, well into the spring. Finally goes back into Gemini and stays there. But this is not a good cycle for Trump, because Uranus, as it's moving back, and even really the whole month of November, it's been the case that it's close enough in Gemini to affect his ascendant, because that super late Leo ascendant is getting the Uranus square. Hence, the shock, something sudden happening. And what is it hitting? It's hitting an ascendant that is Leo. Leo is the primordial fifth house, fifth sign of the zodiac, which always links to love affairs, among many other things like children, games and sports, etc. In his case, it's exactly what it is, right? So, and then he's got the Mars still to look forward to by way of the square, which will come as we move toward winter and Uranus stations and so on in a square. But in a way, he can consider himself lucky, because that Uranus transiting where it is one of the reasons I keep repeating that his health is in grave peril. And if that happens, then of course it'll be even worse, something that could be potentially very catastrophic. The number of times that I've come across with Uranus correlating with strokes, sudden events on the neural level, on the circulation level, in other words, heart attacks, strokes, very, very common, numerous times. And he's definitely going through that period right now, but again, double duty, triple duty. It's at the moment delivering the shock from this direction, namely the Epstein files. And as I say, he can try to push it away, he can try to keep distracting, and I will have to say, be careful with this guy, because he is one of the most malevolent individuals I've come across in my life, if not the worst. I have to look to historical figures most of the time, unless I start studying serial killers or something. But in terms of, especially in public life, politicians, this guy's one of the worst. So he will do anything to try to push the news away. Of course, as he always does, he'll lie through his teeth. He's a stone cold liar. He'll just repeat that it's a hoax, that it's wrong, that it's not true, that it's manufactured, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? I don't think it's going to work. He won't be able to make it go away. Plain and simple. And bottom line, my feeling is this is going to get worse. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It's completely free, but it really helps. Thank you.